This is the plaintiff, Jim Jackson. He's a renter from Texas, and he says the defendant denied him a rental because he has a large family. He's suing for $1,000 in statutory damages related to his discrimination claim. This is the defendant, Wilson Wharton, who claims he found a better renter and that Jim is just angry he was denied the rental.
Will all parties please raise their right hand?
What you're about to hear is only real in your imagination. The judgments are fictitious, but real-life lessons are waiting around the bend. Welcome to RentPrep Court.
All rise for the Honorable Judge Rudy Fortune.
Jim Jackson, you are suing Mr. Wilson Wharton for damages of $1,000 because you believe you and your family were discriminated against. What kind of evidence do you have to substantiate your claims?
Your Honor, I have 6 kids, and it's been very difficult for my wife and I to find a place to live. We've been denied many rentals, and so far, Mr. Wharton's been the only time we felt discriminated against.
What makes you believe that you were discriminated against?
When we looked at the rental, he kept asking us prying questions about our family. He started off by making a comment about our minivan and asked me how many kids we have. He made comments during the showing and said that the rental was ideal for couples and not great for families. But we're desperate, so we filled out an application and paid the $50 fee, and we were never told if we were denied.
So how did you find out you were denied the rental?
I called Mr. Wharton about a week later to ask about the rental, and he said he went with another applicant.
Mr. Wharton, is this true?
Not completely, Your Honor. I never made any comments about their minivan or that the rental is better suited for landlords. That simply did not happen. Jim's right that I did rent out the space to someone else who was a better fit for the rental.
And how did you make that determination that the other applicant was a better fit for your rental?
They had a much longer and more stable job history, so I ran their background check and everything checked out fine.
Mr. Wharton, did you provide Mr. Jackson with your tenant selection criteria when he filled out an application?
No, Your Honor.
Your situation reminds me of a friend of mine growing up. A bunch of us used to play baseball down by the quarry at the edge of town. We'd go to Mr. Jenkins' grocery store and snag some of his spare cardboard boxes. We'd make some bases and drop them down on the field and have ourselves a day playing until supper time. One of our friends we called Racing Rick. He'd run so fast around the bases his feet would never touch cardboard. Not until he got home. In school, he was the same way. He was always cutting corners to get things done as quickly as possible. Mr. Wharton, do you understand why I'm bringing up Racing Rick today?
I'm not sure I'm following, Your Honor.
You mentioned you didn't provide the applicant with your tenant selection criteria. In the state of Texas, it is required to make printed notice of the landlord's tenant selection criteria available to the applicant. Are you aware of this law?
No, I wasn't, Your Honor.
Now, this tells me you're a landlord who doesn't touch the bases because you're too busy thinking about home plate. You're racing just like Rick to get that rental filled as fast as possible. My suggestion is that you read up on your state and local municipalities' laws before you start screening tenants.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I'll do that ASAP. I bet he didn't read up on the fair housing laws neither. I want my money for being discriminated against.
Mr. Jackson, my courtroom is not a place for accusations, but finding the truth of the matter. Do you have any other evidence to present that would suggest you were discriminated against?
No, Your Honor, but it's obvious he doesn't follow the law.
Mr. Jackson, as far as your case of discrimination against Mr. Wharton, please tell your wife I said sorry, Miss Jackson, and I am for real, and I never meant to make your daughters cry, and that I apologize 1,000,000,000,000 times. You see, a courtroom isn't a place for anecdotal evidence. I need hard evidence, and not your version of the truth.
Thank you very much for seeing my side of the story and agreeing with me, Your Honor.
I'm not finished, Mr. Wharton. Now, yes, I am going to dismiss the charges of $1,000 in this claim of discrimination. However, in the state of Texas, if you charge a tenant an application fee to run a background check, you must present them with a written notice of your tenant selection criteria. Since you rejected the applicant and failed to make your criteria known, you must refund the application fee to Mr. Jackson. You got off lucky today, but my suggestion is that you stop cutting corners and read up on the laws. My verdict is for a payment of $50 to the plaintiff.
Well, the Honorable Judge threw out the discrimination claim in a case of cutting corners, but the plaintiff was still awarded $50. We're going to toss this over to Steve and Eric to see what the guys in the RentPrep offices think about this.
Steve, what are you thinking?
I can't get the Sorry Miss Jackson song out of my head now. Anyone who picked up on that, you guys get bonus points.
Yeah, I was a big Outkast fan growing up. So, if you're not in your mid-30s, 40s, maybe that one didn't make a lot of sense to you, but you can look that up.
But a great case, something that I know that we've talked about before with the importance of having written screening criteria. If you're in the state of Texas, it's even more important for obvious reasons. This case really highlights why you need to have that.
Yeah, and that's something that from researching in the past about tenant screening in Texas that I came across, which I was pretty surprised about, because you have to have everything written out and give them that notice. If you take a rental application, you have to give them exactly what your tenant screening criteria is. So when I was looking this up further, that's when I realized that you actually have to pay back any kind of application fee, too, that you charge to the tenant if you don't provide that.
Sure. And I think that's getting off easy. I think Judge Rudy made a pretty, accurate comment there when he said he thought that the landlord got off easy on this case. I would agree. To just have to pay back that $50 application fee, avoided any discrimination lawsuits or anything like that, definitely got off easy in that case. But certainly avoidable, something he could have done easily. Every landlord should have that screening criteria, which should include really obvious things like, hey, this is what I would like for a minimum credit score. This is what we're looking for, no eviction history, violent criminal histories or history of sex offenses. Be as specific as possible. You don't want to use blanket policies or generalities. But then also for occupancy, that's really important because municipality by municipality, the occupancy standard changes. So I know here in Buffalo, New York is a really good example. You can be in the city of Buffalo and the occupancy standard runs by square footage. Drive to a suburb outside of the city of Buffalo, and now it goes by bedrooms.
Yep.
So in the square footage, I want to make note also in the city of Buffalo, counts every room other than a kitchen and a bathroom.
Yeah, so it's like living room, your dining room, all that square footage counts towards occupancy standards.
Right. So, if you're a landlord and you've got 5 rentals, 2 of them happen to be in the city of Buffalo and 3 are on the outside, and the standards are different, your screening criteria needs to be different. And that's really just little cheat sheets to help you along the way, too. So you don't have to remember that.
And the screening criteria, we actually do have a sample screening criteria you can grab from us by going to the show notes of this episode. And it's not just about pass or fail. It's also about if you're going to make provisions. So if they maybe don't quite meet a certain standard, you can say, all right, that means that this person's going to have to pay more for a security deposit. So it's just not like you don't have to worry about like the fact that you're not going to get anybody to pass all your criteria, because you can kind of flex them a little bit too. But it's just about being consistent when you have them set up.
Yeah, and I know a lot of landlords I've spoken with kind of struggle with this at times, right? Because like you just mentioned, they don't want to make it so difficult that nobody's going to pass. My philosophy on this is don't be afraid to go with strict standards and then have some flexibility under a conditional acceptance, right? So don't be afraid to say 650 is our credit standard, but if somebody has 625, you're saying, okay, we're going to make an exception here for you, give you a conditional, whether or not you charge an additional security deposit or whatever. But I think at least it gives you some flexibility there to be able to say, no, you didn't meet my standards. And let's be honest, as landlords, you want that ability to be able to say, you didn't meet my standards. It's black and white. It's very clear. There's no discrimination here. It is what it is. So again, it's not a terrible idea to have higher standards and then make exceptions as you go along for certain things that you realize, you're willing to overlook.
Yep. And as far as the, you might be wondering, where did the $1,000 number come across? Just from doing a little research, from what I've seen, as far as from the tenant applicant can get up to $1,000 in damages when they sue, but that's really just the beginning of it.
Yeah.
Well, it's $1,000 plus attorney fees. As far as HUD, they have their civil penalties, and they just increased these, I believe, in the summer of 2016. So I'll read some of these off, and this might kind of shock some of our listeners if they're not familiar with this. So in this particular case, the guy ended up getting off of the claims of discrimination because there was no hard evidence. But let's say there was hard evidence that the person had been discriminating. So for a first-time civil penalty, you can get a maximum of $19,787. That is just for a first-time offense on from HUD. So if you are somebody who has it's your second time having an offense in the last 5 years, you could be fined a maximum of $49,467. And then respondents who have violated the act 2 or more times in the previous 7 years could be fined a maximum of $98,935. That's crazy.
It is crazy. And here's where the really slimy part comes in. Most attorneys that are going to represent an applicant know these numbers, and the very first communication they're going to have with you, they're going to start talking about settling. And that's where a lot of landlords get notified for the first time that they're potentially being sued for a discrimination case. I know in California, it's a really big deal right now with having a ton of testers out there that are going out as a mixed race couple, filling out applications and seeing if the landlord even offers them an application or offers them a tour of the home or whatever the case is.
I've even heard cases from a friend of mine who worked at a property management company. He said that they would get calls back to back, and one of them would sound very ethnic and the other one would just sound Caucasian, and they got hit because they picked up and said they had rentals available for the one call and not the person who sounded like they were African American. So there's plenty of ways to do it. It's not even just about coming out to your property. It might even just be a phone call or an email that might be from a tester.
Yeah, for sure. And then, like they usually do, they want to try to settle it out of court. Nobody wants to take their chances necessarily in court. So they're going to say, listen, we can sue you for damages up to $19,000 on this initial, violation. We'd be willing to settle, this is your first offense type of a thing. And they're going to try to squeeze the landlord for anything they can. We've spoken to landlords personally that have been through this. So it's definitely important to have all your ducks in a row, because if you do end up going to court, you better have everything in order and have it ready.
Well, that is also kind of the theme of this episode, is cutting corners. And the reason we picked this phrase, because every episode we try to get like kind of an old-fashioned phrase into the episode.
Proof is in the pudding was the first one.
Yep. And this is the second one, cutting corners. And from my research, this actually first showed up in any writings in a Mark Twain book. And he was talking about a gondolier and the way he was steering the gondola. And then it's also shown with horse-drawn carriages and vehicles. So if you're coming up to a 90-degree turn, you might cut that corner because it's a little bit quicker. But when you do it, it's a little bit, it's less safe when you're doing that.
Bumpier on the back end, right?
Yep, exactly. Hit the curb.
Yeah.
So in that particular case, you see that with landlording as well, because that cutting the corner isn't hitting the curb, but it's like skipping out on, creating a tenant screening criteria, or it's not running the background check, or it's not making the phone verification calls, or it's not documenting everything you're doing and making sure that you're, crossing your T's and dotting your I's, so to speak. So in this particular episode, the cutting the corners, if this landlord had that screening criteria, read their laws, was aware of everything before they went through the tenant screening process, they wouldn't have ended up in court. And granted, in this case too, he only got a $50 fine, which isn't that bad, but there's his time and heartache thinking about if he heard, that you could be up to $20,000 for a first-time offense. Like, imagine what that would do to your week or 2 weeks or however long you have before a court case.
Right. Yeah, and, trends are going in the direction that the rest of the country is going to start adopting more and more strict screening and housing laws and ordinances, kind of like Portland, Oregon, right? Where there's more renters than there are houses to rent or places to rent. So when you have that situation, what needs to tighten up? Usually the regulations, right? So that's going to be a continuing trend. We're not going to have less people in this country in 20 years, 10 years. It's going to continue to go in that direction. So as a landlord, it's really, really important. Take the time, get those things in order. Don't cut corners, obviously. But creating screening criteria is something that doesn't take a ton of time. 10, 15 minutes. Think about what's best for your property. Think about what you want. Take the time to do it, and it can save you in the long run. And certainly if you're in Texas, do it and have it as a ready, prepared handout to be able to give an applicant.
Yeah, and it's not something designed to limit you. It's something to protect you so that when you do get accused, you can point right to something. You can point to the background check or something else in your screening process and say, no, this is why that person was denied. That's never going to even go to court. If you have that information all ready to go, the tenant's just going to say, all right, or the tenant applicant, I should say, is just going to be like, all right, I'll go to the next one,
Right,
you know?
right.
So, all right, well, that does it for this episode of RentPrep Court, the second one we've done. So we hope you've enjoyed this. And if you have, you can reach out to us in the Facebook group. We actually had somebody comment about it. Really appreciate the feedback that we get on that. And if you have any ideas too, feel free to share them because, it's always fun to hear what you guys have gone through and what kind of fun ideas are coming up next.